And then how do we extract out some frequency component, and why is it called a convolution? Okay, so when having this kind of some random signal over time, and then when extracting out some frequency component with respect to maybe 20 hertz, and then maybe 40 hertz. And then how can we extract out the frequency component corresponding to this particular frequency? So this one has the period as what? 1 over 20, right? 1 over 20. So it means, suppose we have 1 second here and 2 seconds here, and then within 1 second we have 20 cycles, right? 20 cycles, and thus that 20 cycle is typically formed as a sinusoidal signal. So we think of really clean sine waves, right? So like this kind of thing. So we have like 20 times of that one period of a sine signal within 1 second. Okay, and then in order to obtain this frequency component corresponding to 20 hertz, and then we basically compute the inner product, just like the convolution. Okay? So in this case, we have this sinusoidal one, and then our signal will be like something like this. Okay, and then from here we have a 0 coefficient, and then we have maybe 3, and then we just multiply them together, and then maybe it's another time unit, and then we have -1, and then maybe 3.5, and then we multiply them, and then we do this kind of inner product over this. It's if it is a discrete time domain, we will do this kind of sum of these finite numbers. But if it is this continuous time domain, what do? We just multiply these two functions together and then compute the integral, right? Because that is the sum of the infinite number of these elements, right? Okay, and then the main idea of this frequency, extracting out this frequency component is similar to convolution. So if we have the exact same patterns as our filter pattern, and then we will have the maximum activation, right? So if our signal has exactly the same shape as the sine waves, and then we will, for example, in this case, it was maybe -3. Although the sine wave is ranging from -1 to 1 as the minimum and maximum value, so it doesn't make sense to have -3, but it's just a hypothetical kind of scenario. And so if we have the exact same value, and then this -3 will be multiplied together, right? Yeah. So it will be always converted into positive values, and thus the value will be maximized. Okay. So so that way we can extract out some frequency component corresponding to 20 hertz, and then maybe 40 hertz, we can do the same thing. But our convolution filter is not this red one, but it has, much frequent. I mean, it has twice the hertz or frequency, and thus this is sometimes a little difficult to draw, but okay, something like this, right? So in order to extract out the frequency component corresponding to 40 hertz, then we do that kind of operation. Okay, so one main difference from the convolution filter typically used in the image is that, I mean, in this original frequency frequency component computation, is that our convolution filter is actually having, usually is having unlimited length. Okay, suppose our signal length is like maybe our signal has duration of 1 minute, but our convolution filter is basically having an infinite length. Okay, so we don't have any kind of shifting kind of stuff. Okay, like stride of 1 and 2 and so on. Okay, and then another another important difference from just the typical frequency kind of transformation from the convolution is that I forgot where I saw it, but have you seen like this kind of thing? Really, SM through M, then F n minus M times G of negative n, right? Where did we see this equation? Okay. Can you tell me the page? Oh, yeah, right. Okay, so here, right, so this is the convolution, right? And then, so it is a little interesting in a sense that, so we want to compute the convolution at the x value of n. So you can think of it as like this, So when applying the convolution at the very top left, and then it is corresponding to it is corresponding to the value of 0, 0 of an n, and then n being 1, 0, for example. In that case, we move the filter to the right, and then we apply the convolution on this part. Okay, so these variables are those different x values where our convolution is applied. But yep, so we have GM, but here it is not like m minus n, but it's n minus m. So so by fixing GM, so GM, so we think of our filter is fixed, okay, and then we think of our image, which is a bigger size, and move it like 1 by 1 horizontally or vertically. Okay, so that is corresponding to this x value or n, or 1, 0 and 0, 1, 1 and so on. Okay, so these values will work as like the amount of a translation of the original or larger input image, right? Given our G of an M or our convolution filter being fixed. Okay, and then so typically in this case, if we think of M minus N, and then it can be thought of as translating f of an M or f of an X, and then we can think of f of X minus 3. And then it can be viewed as like shifting or translating our f of an x by 3 to the right, horizontally, right? So this minus n can work as that kind of amount of a translation of our original signal. So we can represent our convolution that way. But there is one difference. So m minus 1 is actually represented by n minus m. M minus n is represented by n minus m. Okay, so it can be viewed as like, so we have a f of an x, and then we basically flip our function f of an x into f of minus x, and then f of x minus 3, for example, and then it will be f of 3 minus x, right? So yeah, although it's f of an x into f of minus x. So in that case, what does that mean? It's like horizontal flip of our signal. So given our input image, so it's like, yeah, just flipping our image from left to right and right to left, right? And then apply these convolution, right? I mean, yeah, this is not actually just something that happens in our convolutional neural nets in the deep learning. I'm just explaining the original kind of convolution and its original kind of representation or definition. Okay, but yeah, but if we think of this original signal as the flipped version, and then the rest of the story will be the same, right? I mean, just like the convolutional operation in just the CNNs, right? But so it doesn't give really, yeah, it doesn't make really meaningful difference. But when representing the convolution in this manner, or flipping one of these two signals horizontally, and then yeah, using this parallel shifting of the amount of an n, for example, okay, if we represent the convolution in this manner, and then how, yeah, what can we derive from this equation? So if you have a chance, and then I kind of encourage you to study maybe Fourier transformation, and then maybe some wavelet transformation and so on. But so we have a time domain signal f, and then we can think of this frequency domain signal of our original input signal. Okay. Okay. So let's see. So suppose we had this original time domain signal, something like this. Okay. So it can be viewed as a vector of having maybe 60 seconds, and then yeah, suppose our signal is a discrete one, and then 1 second, and then second, I mean 2 seconds, and so on. And then we can view our time series signal as 60 dimensional feature vector, right? And these each of our dimension is corresponding to each of a time step, or yeah, 1 second and 2 seconds, and so on, right? But we can convert this signal equivalently into another vector representation just by using this frequency component extraction, like maybe 1 hertz, and second, I mean 2 hertz, and so on. But yeah, so yeah, we have to divide our frequency kind of values equally. Yeah, and then yeah, in principle, I mean ideally, the time domain signal that has the length of 60, or the dimension is 60, and then it can be equivalently represented as the frequency domain signal that has the same, yeah, that has the same dimensions in the frequency. Okay, so we can represent it as a frequency component with respect to 60 different frequency, yeah, values. So that's how we can convert this time domain signal into frequency domain signal. And then from that frequency domain signal, we can also easily obtain the inverse mapping, where given a particular frequency domain signal. So for example, in this case, so it is time domain signal, and then it is like 1 hertz, and 2 hertz, and 3 hertz, and so on. And then it also can be viewed as a 60-dimensional signal, okay, along the frequency domain. And then they can be converted from one to the other, and vice versa. It's basically one-to-one mapping, okay. And then so you think of this two time domain signal of the original signal f, and then another time domain signal of g, where g is this kind of sinusoidal kind of thing, okay. And then we can do the yeah, convolution between these two signals, okay. And then if we do this kind of convolution between these two time domain signal, and then let's think about their frequency domain representation of f and g, and then suppose f, which is a 60-dimensional time domain signal, was represented as f, which is another 60-dimensional frequency domain signal, and g was converted into large G in the frequency domain, and then f and g and their convolution, which is defined by this form, okay, defined by this form. Then that signal, yeah, that convolution operation is basically the same as, we can think of this time domain signal as the result of this convolution between these two time domain signal, and then if we do the if we convert this time domain signal into a frequency domain, and that frequency domain signal will be just a element-wise multiplication between this f and g. Okay. Okay, so I'm suddenly giving a kind of a brief and inexact lecture about this Fourier transform and things like that. But at a high level, please keep this in mind that the convolution is defined in this a little bit non-intuitive form. Okay, non-intuitive form, and then the reason for defining the convolution that way is because they're a frequency domain signal, and then this final resulting signal, if it is converted into frequency domain, and then that frequency domain vector or signal will be just simply doing the element-wise multiplication between the two frequency domain signals. Okay, so. Yep. Then in this case, how do we obtain the convolution between them? How do we obtain the convolution between them? So the convolution was like doing the inner product between them, right? But it was only giving one value, right? Because of after doing this inner product, and that one value is corresponding to the case where n was 0, right? And then the resulting the left-hand side is not just a scalar value; it is still a signal or a multidimensional vector along the time domain values, right? And then. So if we think of n being 0, and then it is like f of minus m and g of m, right? So we basically, given the original time domain signal, and then we flip it, right, with respect to y-axis, okay, y-axis. So this kind of blue line is basically flipped to the left part. And then we do this convolution operation by multiplying with the g. So g is fixed, okay? G is this sinusoidal one, right? And then it has an infinite one, right? Yeah, although our original f can be viewed as having infinite length along the time domain signal, but we can think of it as having 0 values on the left, and also 0 values after maybe 60 seconds, okay? And then we can represent that finite length of time domain signal that way, right? And then we flip it, and then do the inner product, and then that will give a single scalar value, right? That is, so let's call this as h of x or h of t, because it is along the time domain signal. So that is corresponding to the value of h of 0. And then what about h of 1? And then it is also flipping it. And then we we flip it and then shift it to the right by 1, and then do the convolution. Okay? And that is that inner product value will be the output scalar value corresponding to like h of 1. Okay? And h of 2 can also be obtained in things like that. Okay? And that convolution, I mean, this kind of convolution can be viewed as having like this input image is already a flipped version, and then we move it one by one, right? And that way we obtain this multi-dimensional vector, or this two-dimensional matrix in the case of our signal being a two-dimensional array. Okay.
Explain the discrete Fourier transform from audio signal to spectrogram.
Yeah, it's not directly related to that. I just wanted to give you some overview or some important characteristics about the gigantic background about the convolution in the literature of a signal processing. But well, yeah, in terms of a discrete one, and also you mentioned about the spectrogram thing. So in the case of discrete kind of signal, so do we handle continuous time domain signal or discrete time domain signal in practice when dealing with the audio signals? Audio signals. So in the case of an audio signal, even though it looks like the continuous domain signal, but our computer cannot obtain the infinitely many kind of time domain signal. So it will have a sampling frequency. So if it is 60 hertz, and then it's capturing out like 60 times per second of this signal values, right? So in practice, we will always handle discrete time domain signal, okay? And then also, when it comes to the spectrogram, which was also part of the one quiz problem in the previous lecture, right? And okay, so back to this MFCC. So this MFCC is basically a frequency domain vector representation of the time domain signal within this time within this signal segment, okay, within 20 milliseconds, okay, within this 20 milliseconds, and then we tear it apart, and then we make 0 signals lower and the upper part, and then we do this convolution thing with the particular frequency domain thing, like by applying the sinusoidal one, and then obtain this frequency component, right? And that way we can convert this time domain signal of having 20 milliseconds as a duration into a certain length of a frequency domain signal, right? So you can think of that vector, that corresponds to this MFCC and also spectrogram, okay? So those two are, computed in really in a similar manner. But what's the difference between the MFCC and spectrogram thing? So if we do the frequency component extraction by using kind of uniform, like with the equal distance between two adjacent frequencies, like 0 frequency and maybe 1 frequency, and maybe 20 frequency and 40 frequency and 60 hertz and so on. Okay, if we use this regular or uniform or equally spaced frequency component, and that is called the spectrogram. Okay, so that is a kind of a simplest and probably the most straightforward approach to extract out the frequency component from the signal. Okay, but in the case of this MFCC, in the MEL frequency, so it is just it is not saying just the frequency. Well, it is called it is saying MEL frequency. So what is the meaning of this MEL frequency? Where is it coming from? MEL frequency. Okay, so I don't have much background or knowledge about the meaning or how it was named that way, but it is related to human perception. Okay, human perception. So in the human case, we cannot hear the audio signal that has the frequency component lower than how many? What is the audible frequency range to human? I forgot the range exactly. 얼마 들어요? 22,000. 22,000. Okay, great. 20,000. Okay, so it is basically, this MEL frequency means we don't actually extract out the frequency component below 20 or greater than 20,000 because that signal is not going to be heard to human. And also this MEL frequency thing is so typically when extracting out the frequency component, I mentioned that we use the equally spaced frequency, right? 20 hertz and 40 hertz and 60 hertz and so on. But to humans case or humans ear has a different sensitive ranges in terms of the frequency. So there is some notion called a J and D. I'm not sure if it's corresponding to this audible, audio thing or to ear thing, but it is called the just noticeable difference to human. Okay, so it is something like this. So let's think about the color, and then try to recognize the given two colors are different. So we want to kind of feel it, or we want to just to know it by looking at it using our eye. And then suppose there's two color over here, and then suppose this one is 255 and 00. Okay, so this is clearly pure red, right? And then 254 and 00. Okay, it's just a slightly less red color. So do you think we can discriminate or differentiate between these two colors when they are just placed near with each other, nearly with each other? So it may or may not, right? So so in these cases, suppose this one cannot be noticeably different from this color, and then what would be the minimum distance in order for humans to identify or recognize the difference between these two colors as really the different colors? And suppose that was 248 and comma and 0, 0. And then just the noticeable difference is maybe 7, 0, right? But would that amount of 7, kind of difference of 7 in terms of red channel be the same in terms of this just noticeable difference when it comes to maybe 128 and comma and 0, 0? So in that case, when placing almost the same color, and then we decrease the value of it, and then we may be more sensitive to this less red color, and then in that case, even if it's 126 and 0, 0, and then we may already be able to notice the difference between these two colors, right? So although we need to consider like these 3 different vectors of having R, G, B channels separately, but I mean they are also involved jointly. I mean simultaneously that influences our just noticeable differences. But when thinking of this red channel, and then we can also think about this kind of just noticeable difference as one unit of perceivable kind of a unit that we can recognize as different one. So in that case, 255 and 248 and that is going to be 1 unit. And then maybe from 248, suppose we can recognize the difference as 240, maybe 5. Okay, so this is the minimum amount starting from 248. And then, of course, these intervals may not be uniform, right? Okay. So along the one-dimensional kind of values of red channels, so we can kind of do the human experiments and then figure out or identify the just noticeable difference at each different points of this red channels, right? And that way, even though this gap is 3 and this gap is maybe 7, and then to humans, we can view these two unequal kind of unequal gap as being the same gap. Okay, I mean from our cognition or our perception, right? Okay, so we can kind of draw a new kind of coordinate and unequal kind of coordinate values, right, based on our perception. Okay, so we can do the same thing on this frequency domain. Okay, so what's the noticeably different audio signals in terms of their frequencies? Okay, so some frequencies we may be really sensitive to identify, oh, these two different frequency audio signals are really, fields are really different signals. When it comes to like in the middle range, and then maybe 100 and 102 hertz, we may be able to recognize these two as the noticeably different signals as having a different frequency. But some lower or larger ranges, we may not be that much sensitive to the difference. Okay, and so in that case, we can have like non-uniform, discretization of this frequency domain within this audible range, right? And then we can just do this uniform kind of a frequency component extraction, and then we just sum them up, sum these frequency components within, belonging to the same, notice, belonging to the same kind of unnoticeable range of these frequency signals. Okay, so that kind of scales or non-uniform frequency scales based on human perception is called a Mel frequency. Okay, so it's quite difficult to explain, especially in English. Okay, so that is something like a Mel frequency, and C is a capstone, and the last C is a coefficient. Coefficient is a frequency component. Okay, and then capstone. I forgot actually the meaning of the capstone, but somehow they do additional kind of additional processing or additional transformation of these original frequency components that we extracted from the time domain signal, and that way, so spectral means it is kind of corresponding to like a frequency component, right? And then we did a little bit trickier, we did additional kind of tricky kind of processing onto this spectral kind of a component or spectral coefficient, and that way they call it as capstone. I don't know. I cannot explain the details, but spec is just reversed into caps. Okay, so that way they call it as a Mel frequency capstone coefficient. So that is a MFCC, and at a high level, it is basically really sophisticated feature extraction strategy. Feature extraction strategy from the time domain signal. Especially for audio signal into like a frequency domain signal. Okay. So it's just a side story, but we have a spectrum, right? Then when I went to the graduate school, at that time, I was a master's student in EE or electrical engineering, because I did I majored in EE in my undergrad, and then I did master in the same department in the US, and then the first advisor that actually kicked me out finally, and he gave the topic. I mean the research topic called the spec MERT. Okay, so that is like corresponding to like the word reversing the order on the last 4 letters. Okay, yeah, so it is like a little bit of an approximation technique of this MFCC by using different techniques. And then I was new to research, and then I didn't fully understand the intent of that professor. And the technique was try to approximate and maybe accelerate how we extract. I mean the algorithm to compute the MFCC much more efficiently. But I didn't understand why we need to do that processing more efficiently. Yeah. But anyways, yeah. So eventually, it was not. Even though I generated some result by just following the professor's advice, but I failed to write the paper out of those results, and probably that's why I got kicked out. Yeah, I didn't have much motivation, and but anyways, okay. So that's a side story. Okay, and then so MFCC is nowadays not much used when it comes to the deep learning applications. So when using deep learning on the audio and the speech signals, and then as you studied in the lecture, we don't use MFCC anymore, but we just use a little raw level of the signal of just a spectrogram. So spectrogram doesn't involve any of these mel frequency thing based on a human perception and like additional kind of processing of changing spectral into capstral and things like that. It just is a simple frequency component extraction. Okay, and that is called a spectrogram. But I don't have much idea about between the. I don't have much idea about the difference between the spectrogram and the wavelet. Okay, wavelet. So wavelet is almost the same thing of extracting out the frequency component. But so if you see the word wavelet, and then you can think of it as extracting some frequency components just like this from the time domain signal. But one interesting characteristic about this wavelet is that it has some trade-off. Okay, it has some trade-off. So that trade-off is also applied here as well. And so so within this 20 millisecond length of a time domain signal, so which one do you think is more reliable than the other between like high frequency domain signal or low frequency signal? So again, the question is, we will extract out the high frequency component and low frequency component. Okay, so which one between the two is more reliable one, or more reliable frequency component? I know the question is a little bit ambiguous or vague, but can anyone make a guess? Which one is more trustworthy, high frequency component or low frequency component? High, let's go for high frequency component is more reliable, and low frequency is more reliable. Why? Okay, so there was no one who raised a hand there for high frequency component. And can anyone give a reason? sampling frequency. Yeah. Ah, I see. I see. So if we assume that the frequency component that we consider is lower than the Nyquist frequency, then what do you think? Does it make sense? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, the student pointed out some interesting stuff that I didn't think about. So we are using a discrete time signal, right? So within maybe 20 milliseconds, and then suppose we have yeah, our sampling frequency is maybe having the interval of 1 millisecond, and then we will have the signal like this. Okay, so we will have 20-dimensional signals, right? And then we don't know what is actually going on within this sub millisecond period, right? Right. So it can, yeah. So I suppose, yeah, this is a perfectly sinusoidal one, right? But our clue or our information is only a limited number or finite number of those sampled one of 20 like sample, right? But can we guarantee that this signal is really this really sinusoidal one? It may or may not be true, right? Because what about this, right? So in this case, it is also perfectly possible, yeah, right? So we have to kind of do the interpolation between these two sampled point, right? So yeah, so that way, in principle, we so in this case, we have the maximum frequency component that we can extract out, okay, given a particular sampling frequency or sampling kind of period, okay. Okay, and then yeah, so yeah, that way, although it's rough, but you can understand that we have some maximum amount of frequency component that we can extract out given a discrete time signal. But yeah, my original question was, so if it is if that frequency components that frequencies are less than the maximum allowed or possible frequencies, and then between the low and the high frequency components, which one is reliable? Yeah, so in that sense, high frequency may be less reliable than the low frequency. Yeah, in that sense, it may be true, but yeah, in the case of wavelet kind of transformation, there is something called the time frequency domain, maybe trade-off or something like that. So that trade-off is as follows. So we are dealing with really a finite length of the time domain signal that ranges from 0 to 20 milliseconds, right? So in that case, let's think of extracting out some low frequency component. I mean, my expected answer was that low frequency component is less reliable. I mean, high frequency component is more reliable. It is because, so within limited time domain and time durations, and then in order to observe like high frequency components, suppose we applied so now our signal is something like this, and then our frequency component, I mean, yeah, so we want to obtain the frequency component by applying this kind of sinusoidal one, right? And then in that case, in order to compute the or extract out the frequency component, we basically assume the signal is kind of a infinite length. So that is the ideal situation. So if it has a strong, like a low frequency component that has the period of 20 milliseconds, and then it should really has the repetition or periodic signals, yeah, for every 20 milliseconds, right? So the same signal and then another one, and so on, right? That is really the meaning of the true frequency component that corresponds to the period of 20 milliseconds, right? And so here, given this limited time duration, we can only capture or we can only observe one time of period in order to extract out this frequency component corresponding to this 20 millisecond as period, right? But what about t being 10 millisecond, which is twice higher, which has the twice higher frequency as the previous one? And in that case, we can observe like two times the length of the one period, right? And so in that case, yeah, we can observe we can verify or check two times of periods if the frequency was lower. I mean, frequency was higher, right? So here the main point is that our time duration is set as the 20 millisecond. Okay, in that case, yeah, lower frequency. I mean, extracting out the lower frequency may be less reliable. Okay, but high frequency component, because we can observe more number of periods, more number of repetitive patterns within the limited 20 millisecond time duration. Okay, so this high frequency component is considered more reliable. Okay, and then yeah, back to this original time domain signal. Where did the 20 millisecond come from? So that was just kind of hyperparameter that we set, right? So we just chop our time domain signal, which has much larger length, into just the pieces that has a 20 millisecond as one piece, right? But we apply, or with whether it's a MFCC or spectrogram, we apply or extract out the frequency domain, frequency component within this limited signal length, right? And then in order to increase the reliability of the low frequency component, what we can do is that we can actually increase each time duration, right? As considered as one unit, right? So if we use maybe 50 milliseconds as one time of one unit of signals, and then yeah, even when extracting out the frequency component corresponding to 20 milliseconds as period, yeah, that frequency component will be much more reliable, right? But in that case, what is the trade-off in this case? Given the same total length of the signal, we cannot extract out many of these. Basically our time unit got longer, and thus the total number of time unit is smaller, right? So that way, in order to increase the reliability of frequency component, the time domain or this the length of the the number of time domain signals will be reduced. Okay, will be decreased. Okay, so that kind of thing is called this time and frequency kind of trade-off in the literature of a wavelet thing. Okay. Okay, so I'm not sure how much it helps to you guys, but in case you happen to study a little bit more kind of signal processing in terms of a Fourier transform and the wavelet thing, and then you may have a better idea about what I explained. Okay, so back to our original lecture. So when it comes to the deep learning application to speech signal or audio signals, we just use a spectrogram, right? Which is a frequency domain representation, right? And that is the main input signal. But the lecture said so that is a kind of a in terms of the degree of the being raw of our signal, this one is much more processed one, and this one has much more much smaller dimensions compared to the spectrogram. Okay, and then the spectrogram will extract out much more number of frequency component with also the equal distances, and then yeah, it can be viewed as a more raw signal than this MFCC that contains more number of unprocessed signals, and the extreme raw signal, I mean the most raw signal will be just a time domain signal without doing any frequency component extraction, right? So that will be the most raw signal, but that raw signal in the current state of the art, yeah, so that time domain signal will not work properly with the deep learning, right? So that's what this lecture said. Right? But eventually, if our model advances or improves, and then sometimes we may be able to give just a raw time domain signal without extracting out any frequency component at all. Okay, but still, like a spectrogram thing can be viewed as the signal that can be mapped inversely to this time domain signal in principle, and thus it can be viewed as just a raw signal that didn't lose any of the information contained in our original signal. Okay, but yeah. Any questions?
그러면 TTS에서 아웃풋도 스펙트로그램.
좋은 질문인데 그건 아닌 것 같은데요. 네. 그러니까 스피치나 오디오 시그널이 이제 디코딩 단의 아웃풋으로 쓰일 때는 그거는 그냥 타임 도메인 시그널을 내는 것 같아요. 그죠? 뭔가 웨이브넷이나 뭐 이런 거 한번 찾아볼래요? 찾아보고 좀 알려주세요. Yeah, so yeah, that is quite interesting point and insightful point. So when it comes to generating these audio signals or speech signals, I think the output signal form from our decoder will be just raw time domain signal, I think. Yeah. 아, 그래요? 스펙트로그램을 다시 웨이브로 바꿀 수 있어요? 아, 그래요? 그럼 스펙트로그램이 아웃풋이에요? 최종 아웃풋? 아, 그래요? 어떤 모델? 딥러닝 그 전 모델과
스펙트로그램이 나올 수 있도록
네.
인풋 스튜스 모델이 사용하는데 최종적으로 스펙트로그램이 나오거든요. 스펙트로그램이 나오면 그거를 이제 여러 가지 알고리즘들이 있는데
네.
그 웨이브넷 같은 경우에서도 그 성능을 알고 있으니까 너무 시간이 오래 걸려서 다시 브리핑이라 해가지고 폴로를 여러 번 돌려서 그냥 어떤 알고리즘에서 노이즈한 웨이브 주면 그걸 통해서 페이즈 정보를 추출해가지고
네.
다시 사운드를 이렇게 복원을 해내는 거거든요.
하여튼 딥러닝 뭐 있었죠? 스피치나 오디오 중에 좀 약간 유명한 모델들이 뭐 있었죠? 네, 타코트론. 아, 타코트론도 그러면 스펙트로그램을 최종적으로 내요? 아.
그리고 스펙트로그램에서
네.
실제 오디오 감 방식은 여러 가지가 있는데
네.
그중에서 빌트인 립이라는 게 많이 쓰였는데 요새 또 업데이트된 타코트론은
네.
어떻게 하는지 방법이 좀 바뀐 것 같아요.
그렇군요. 나도 몰랐네. 좋은 걸 알았네. 네. 최종 시그널이 역시 아웃풋 디코딩 할 때도 스펙트로그램이라고 하네요. 네. 네, 그 그리핀? 그래핀? 그리핀?
대시하고
네.
님이 한국 사람.
아 그래요? 한국 사람이 만들어서. 그럼 그게 스펙트로그램이 여기 나왔고 또 이 타임 세그먼트에서 나왔으면 이거 두 개를 그러니까 잘 이어붙이도록 뭔가 페이스나 이런 거 조절하는 거죠.
정보가 없는 거잖아요. 그걸 가능한 어프로크시메이트를 할 수 있도록 하는 이터레이티브한 방식.
아 그렇군요. 그렇군요. 네, 좋은 거 알았네요. 스피치 전문가가 여기 많았네요. 네, 틀리게 얘기한 거 없나요? 뭐 두리뭉실하게 얘기하고 틀릴 게 별로 없나? 네, 지금 약간 이야기한 거가 이제 뭐냐 하면 이게 약간 이런 거거든요. 여기에 이 우리는 이 스펙트로그램, 그러니까 각 프리퀀시 컴포넌트들의 벡터들을 각 타임 세그먼트 20ms에 해당하는 그 프리퀀시 컴포넌트에 해당하는 벡터들을 얻잖아요. 그러면 이거 약간은 여기서 여기에 이어지게 하기 위해서 이걸 좀 약간 잘 이어붙여야 되거든요. 잘 이어붙인다는 게 이제 무슨 말이냐면 첫 번째 20ms에서 두 번째 20ms에서 어떤 프리퀀시 컴포넌트가 예를 들면 여기서 뭐 네, 그러니까 오로지 그냥 그러니까 사인 성분 하나가 있고 그게 뭐 예를 들면 20ms에 해당하는 뭐 네, 조 사인 웨이브만 있다라고 생각을 하면 조 프리퀀시 컴포넌트만 순수하게 있어요. 그러면은 이게 약간 이게 좀 이게 수학적으로 증명이 좀 거시기한데 이 여기서에 나타나는 그러니까 이건 어떻게 보면 원합 벡터겠죠. 그러니까 20ms에 해당하는 주기. 그러니까 요거가 이제 프리퀀시면 이제 1/20 밀리세컨드. 그러니까 이제 20분의 1000이죠. 1000분 20분의 1000이라는 헤르츠를 가지는 성분이 뭐 예를 들면 1이고 나머지는 다 0인 성분을 가지고 있는 프리퀀시 컴포넌트. 요거는 타임 도메인 시그널로 바뀔 때 이게 아까 얘기했던 그런 원투원 매핑이 약간은 원투원 매핑이 정확하게는 아니고 그게 이제 예를 들면 여기가 20ms가 이렇게 있으면 이게 예를 들면 이것도 순수하게 이제 그 주기가 네, 혹은 프리퀀시 컴포넌트가 딱 20ms를 주기로 가지는 그 성분만 있는 거고요. 근데 중요한 게 이게 약간 이렇게 좀 밀린 거. 네, 이런 밀린 시그널 있잖아요. 이렇게 좀 쉬프팅 이렇게 된 것도 역시 저것도 순수하게 그냥 20ms의 프리퀀시 컴포넌트만 있는 거가 되거든요. 저거를 어떻게 증명해야 될까요? 밀리면 사실 적분값이 좀 달라지긴 하는데 그래서 프리퀀시 컴포넌트가 아까 얘기했던 그 사인 웨이브를 0에서 시작한 사인 웨이브로 좀 맞추면 내적값이 좀 적어지긴 할 텐데 왜 이게 나와야 되는지 네, 왜 이게 X축으로 쉬프트된 시그널도 이제 손해 없이 이제 완벽하게 그 주기성만 딱 들어맞으면 저것도 이제 네, 저거를 내가 지금 설명은 못 하겠는데 어쨌건 지금 중요한 거는 이런 프리퀀시 컴포넌트가 1이라 하더라도 그 프리퀀시에 해당하는 뭔가 성분을 이제 요 20ms에서 요 빨간색으로 갖다 붙일 수 있고 요 파란색으로 갖다 붙일 수가 있어요. 그러면은 이제 두 번째 어떤 20ms에서도 또 이제 역시 거기서도 또 이거에 해당하는 성분만 나왔다고 하면은 그걸 이제 역변환을 그쪽 그러니까 저쪽 두 번째 어떤 네 이쪽에서 뽑아주면 그것도 여기서 이렇게 붙이느냐 아니면 또 뭐 이렇게 붙이느냐 아니면 뭐 또 뭐 이렇게 붙이는 되게 다양한 방법들이 존재해요. 그래서 그 다양한 방법들이 존재할 때 이제 왼쪽과 오른쪽을 아마 약간 접붙이기를 해줘야 저기가 이렇게 저거를 사운드를 소리로 들어보면 뭐 하다가 갑자기 삑 하고 삑 그래요. 맞죠? 저거 붙여주는 게 그거 아니에요? 아니에요?
맞는 타임 도메인에서 스펙트럴 도메인으로 변환하면서 시간 정보라는 게
네.
상실이 되니까 그걸 역으로 다시 복원하기 위해서.
이걸 하여튼 저기 타임 유닛 20ms면 20ms마다 이렇게 좀 타임 도메인 시그널에서 이렇게 연속되게 좀 하는 거를 목적으로 하는 거 아니에요?
자체에서는 스펙트럼에 그러니까 스펙트럼 자체가 조금씩 있는 게 아웃풋이 나오고 그 아웃풋이 다 나온 거에 대해서 그래픽 내부에서 돌리고
네.
저런 문제는 어떻게 보면 그 안에서 해결되는 거예요.
이게 그리핀에서 해결하고자 하는 메인 프로블럼 아니에요? 약간
그것도
바운더리에서의
지금 말씀하시는 웨이브 땅에서의
네.
그런 걸 말씀하시는 거예요.
타임 도메인에서의 뭔가
스펙트럼 자체는 프리퀀시 도메인 어쨌든 이건 타임 도메인이긴 하지 프리퀀시 도메인의 문제를 어떻게 하면 웨이브 땅에 올릴 것이냐.
그러니까 변환을 할 때 하여튼 저런 하여튼 좀 밀려도 하여튼 하여튼 이런 게 아닐까 예상을 해보고 저걸 좀 이터러티브가 이렇게 맞추. 네. 네.
그리핀님 당시 팝콘처럼 초기 모드 쓰인 음성 복원 끝단인데 아까 말씀드렸다가 팝콘처럼 업데이트된 버전은 웨이브넷 세상에서 같은 그 목적을 달성을 해요.
그리핀인가
키워드가 아니고
그리핀인가 그게 하는 거 그거 하는 거를 웨이브넷에 뉴럴넷에서 내부적으로 커버가 된다고.
아니 웨이브넷이라고
네.
오디오 제너레이션 하는
네.
그 알고리즘을 구글에서 내놨는데
네.
그걸 이용해서 그 팝콘처럼 끝단에서 해야 하는 제너레이트 파트를
네.
해결을 할 수 있어서 최근에 나온 팝콘처럼 TTS 모델은 웨이브넷을 사용해서 그걸 하고 있어요. 원래 모델이 그리핀님으로 그 과정을 해결했다.
네. 그리핀님인가 그거를 웨이브넷의 어떤 부분이 해결해 준다 이거예요?
네.
단순히 말하면 성능 차이인데 빌트인 같은 경우는 아무래도 머신러닝 성능의 차이고요. 이제 논문에서 얘기하는 거는 웨이브넷 썼을 때좀 이상한 그래픽이 나온다는 거고 사실 웨이브넷 자체만 했을 때는 그냥 웨이브부터 시작해서 웨이브가 딱 나오거든요.
웨이브넷은 그러니까 이제 스펙트로그램을 생성하는 게 아니라 타임
네.
도메인 시그널 자체를 생성하는 거죠.
그래서 어떤 훈련할 때도 보면 들어가는 것과 끝단이 같은 웨이브를 해가지고
그러니까 타임 도메인의 웨이브 시그널.
CNN을 연결해가지고 이제
그렇군요.
하나하나 샘플을 그 방식은 사실 그 방식이 이제 어떻게 보면 처음부터 웨이브를 생성해낼 수 있는 단계긴 한데 그 팝콘트론에서는 단지 그런 식으로 안 쓰고 그냥 마지막에 그렇게 있는 글자를 스펙트럼을 넣어서 웨이브를 추출하는 식으로.
그러니까 타코트로는 엔드 투 엔드의 어떤 영역, 그러니까 최종 엔드 투 타겟 엔드가 스펙트로그램이고, 그러니까 그거를 이제 후처리적인 알고리즘인 그리핀 림이라는 걸 써갖고 웨이브 트랜스폼, 그러니까 웨이브 시그널 아니면 타임 도메인 시그널로 바꾸고, 웨이브 넷 자체는 이제 제너레이션을 그냥 그 타임 도메인 시그널까지 그냥 해버린다. 그게 이제 엔드 투 엔드네. 그게. 네, 그래요. 네, 좋은 정보네요. Okay, so yeah, let's take a break for 10 minutes and then continue. And at 3:35.
훈련을 할 때 플립을 왜 해요?
네?
플립 왜 하는 거예요?
이게 플립을 해야만 그 프리퀀시 도메인과 프리퀀시 도메인으로 바꿨을 때 심플 그 엘리먼트 와이즈 멀티플리케이션이 돼요.
아, 플립을 해야만 되게 돼요.
플립을 하는 형태로 정의가 되어져 있어야 프리퀀시 도메인에서 아까 그냥 두 개를 엘리먼트 와이즈 멀티플리케이션.
근데 그거는 어쨌든 그 도메인에서 해당 사항이 있는 거고 저희가 하는 비전 쪽에서의
그거는 좀
커뮤니케이션이라고
상관없어요.
네, 알겠습니다. 난 반스니까.
오빠를 더 했는데 나는 생각이 안 됐나? 지금 다시 쓰고 싶은데. 근데 이게 지금
승인이 안 나면 이게 수정할 시간이 있는 거야. 그래서 이게 나버려가지고 수정할 게 있어. 진짜 근데 약간 손이 문제로 태워줘야 제일 중요한 이미 쓴 내용이잖아.
사람이 더 싫어.
아, 예, 저기 김선희 선생님 혹시 안 계신가요? 아, 그래요? 예, 알겠습니다.
데이터를 준 다음에 스크린을 해. 그래서 각각의 노래를 집어넣어. 거기에 상이 연결돼 있으니까 내려가 메모리에 넣어.
그 음성 스피치 신테시스 쪽에서는 어떤 게 있어요? 웨이브넷, 그다음에 타코트론.
웨이브넷은 가이디드 제너레이션이 아니라 TTS 용도로 하나만 쓸 수는 없어요. 아까 말씀드렸던 것처럼 끝단에서의 타임 시리즈 로이 제너레이션을 담당할 수 있는 게 웨이브넷 컴포넌트예요. 그래서 요즘에 제일 잘 되는 거는 타코트론.
그죠? 네.
근데 타코트론 안에 이제 웨이브 제너레이션을 위해서 웨이브넷이 들어가요. 근데
근데 문제는 웨이브넷이 그게 제너레이션까지
엄청 오래 걸려요.
웨이브넷이 그러니까 이것도 TTS죠?
아니에요. 저는
아니에요?
텍스트를 인풋으로 하는 게 아니라
네.
웨이브를 넣으면 웨이브야.
원래는 웨이브에서 웨이브가 나오는 그 모델인데 그거를 이제 애플리케이션을 다른 데도 같이 올렸어요.
어떻게 앞단을 뭘 같이 넣느냐에 따라서 제너레이트가 텍스트 가이디드 제너레이션 그러니까 TTS가 될 수 있는 건데요.
그러니까 이게 그러면
그거까지 구현이 되죠.
이게 오토 인코더나 아니면은 뭐 이렇게 랭귀지 모델처럼 넥스트 타임 도메인 시그널에서 넥스트 어떤 웨이폼의 값을
네.
그런 거예요? 이게
좀 해도 되는데
아 그래요?
저기 보면 저 인풋에서
그러니까 이게 랭귀지 모델처럼 생겼었어요 이게. 아
PD
엠브레임을 봐서
그러니까 이게 왜
한 프레임 넣고 그거 놓고 다음 거 나오고 넣고 나오고 넣고 나오고 이런 식으로.
이거 하나가 스칼라예요, 벡터예요? 벡터예요.
저게 웨이브 자체에서는 스케일하는 거예요.
근데 사실 저 한 점이 벡터 아니에요.
여기 그러니까 웨이브 이거 저기
그 웨이브 포맷 하나
벡터예요? 벡터 뭐예요?
한 점이 벡터야.
그럼 그 벡터가 뭐예요?
안에
그러니까 뭘 나타내는 벡터예요?
아 이게 한 점이 한 타임 포인트.
네. 웨이브 폼 뭐 그렇게
그러니까 한 윈도우를 찾으면 그 윈도우에 있는 원 디멘셔널 어레이가 저기서 한 점으로 표현된 거예요.
아 그래요? 아 그러니까 이게 뭔가 샘플링 프리퀀시처럼 이렇게 따다다닥 있는 그 하나하나가 아니라 한
왜
20일
지금 하라고 했는지 알죠? 그러니까 원래는 그러니까 하나를 원래 스케일을 하고 어떤 그러니까 원래 숫자 값이잖아요. 원래도 같은데 저기에서는 어떤 소리 있냐면 이거를 8비트인가? 8비트 하면 255까지 넣을 수가 있잖아요. 그래서 그걸 원합처럼
디스크리타이즈드 된 밸류로 원합 벡터다 이거예요 저게? 아 그러니까 근데 저건 타임 도메인 시그널인 거죠? 네. 그러면은 오케이.
그래서 사실 저 안에 저 회색점이 굉장히 크거든요. 되게 심플하게 써주는데
저 회색점이
여러 가지 것들이 일어나서 사실 저희 그냥 되는데
그러니까 이놈은 그러니까 예를 들면 한 웨이브 폼에 예를 들면 이게 이렇게 돼 있다 그러면 이거 높이가 뭐 이렇게 이게 뭐 3이다 그러면 이걸 이렇게 디스크리타이즈 해놓은 거죠? 그렇죠? 이거를 8비트면은 총 2에 8비트면 128인가요? 64, 256인가? 256까지의 그러니까 미니멈에서 맥시멈 값을 256개로 이렇게 디스크리타이즈 해갖고 거기서 원합 벡터를 저기서 만들어내는 거예요? 소프트맥스 값으로? 소프트맥스 벡터로? 아 그렇군요. 근데 이거는 그럼 기본적으로는 약간 오토인코더 아니면 랭귀지 모델 같은 거네요. 여기서 어딘가까지는 인코더고 어딘가까지는 디코더 이렇게 디코더 부분을 TTS 쪽에 디코더랑 붙이면 이게 타임 도메인 시그널까지 만들어줄 수 있는 그럼 이게 인코더 디코더 이거는 좀 약간 그런 게 아닌 것 같아 보이는데 어디서까지가 어디를 잘라버려야 돼? 다른 거랑 붙이면
그것만 보니까 아까 말씀드린 핫포트론의 예를 들면 핫포트론 자체는 내부적으로 큰 파천으로 C2C 모델이고요. C2C 모델에서 첫 단위 그 내부적으로 다이렉션을 시에는 여러 가지 피처 수준이나 아니면 여러 가지 수준을 하고 있거든요. 그래서 어쨌든 들어가는 거는 이제 텍스트가 들어가고요. 아웃풋을 스펙트럼을 나오게 돌려줘요. 그다음에 디코더가 가지고 최종적으로 텍스트를 줬는데 스펙트럼을 나오면 스펙트럼이 계속 나오는데 이제 어떤 피처가 나오는 그걸 그래서 하는데 다만 웨이브는
웨이브 요 모듈을 붙이는 거예요.
네.
근데 그러면 여기 인풋은 스펙트로그램일 거잖아요. 근데 여기는 여기 타임 도메인의 웨이폼의 디스크리타이즈된 128비트 그럼 이게 지금 다시 이게 입력이 스펙트로그램이고 웨이폼의 미들 아키텍처는 그대로 쓰되 인풋을 스펙트로그램으로 넣어서 저기에서 128비트 저기 8비트짜리 뭔가 타임 도메인 시그널 하나씩으로 넣는다. 네. 인풋도 타임 도메인 시그널이요? 아, 스펙트로그램이 펑캣 때 갖고 들어가요? 아, 어텐션이 쓰여요? 아, 그 텍스트에서의 그 단어, 워드 레벨에서의 어텐션? 그러면?
그건 이제 정하기 나름인데 현재 캐릭터 레벨
캐릭터 레벨?
어떤 레벨로
그러게.
어쨌든 그 어텐션 벡터를 가지고 타임 와이즈 얼라인드 내가 지정한 셈포의 얼라인먼트를 좋아했어. 그 정보가 웨이트 들어가면 타임 도메인에서 시그널이 인풋으로 그 과정을 웨이트로 가져서
그렇군요. 그러니까 한글이나 이런 것도 잘 되나요?
한글 완전 잘
완전 잘 돼요? 하긴 뭐 그런 거 많이 있었죠. 뭐 유인나가 읽어주는 거.
근데 유인나 거는
네.
엔투엔드로 하고
그래요?
유인나 거는 이어지는 시간이 시작업이 많이 들어가서
그거는 무슨 모델을 쓴 거예요?
그러니까 인성 합성 방식 중에서 그게 패러메트릭하게 하는 방식이야. 용어가 있는데 TTS 쪽에서 토큰마다의 다름을 다 가지고 있으면서 그걸 가지고 필요에 따라서 이어붙이는
아, 네. 뭐 다이나믹 타임워핑 뭐 이런 거 뭐 이렇게 그러니까 뭔가 하여튼 얼라인을 한다는 거죠. 이게 늘려줘야 될 때 늘려주고 뭐.
좀 옛날 방식.
네, 그렇군요. 네, 오케이. 네. Okay, so we have many good students who has an expertise in speech, especially speech synthesis, because although our lecture covered only speech to text, right? So so because a generative model is much more interesting in these days. So in the case of generative model, although we haven't studied yet, but this WaveNet published from DeepMind was the very first and quite outstanding, the state-of-the-art method that generate, where the generic quality is quite state-of-the-art. And then also, if you may know, there is another paper for the speech recognition called the Tacotron, and it has this GitHub website, and it has many interesting examples of synthesized speech. It doesn't have one. Maybe from here. The website had much longer, if I remember correctly, but yeah. I don't know why the volume doesn't work, but you can try out this website. So those two models are probably the most state-of-the-art one. And yeah, in terms of the input and output kind of thing, this WaveNet, I just learned from the students that this WaveNet has this kind of architecture, and just skipping the middle part, while focusing just the input and output. So input and output will be just the time domain, time domain signal value. So each dot along the horizontal axis is corresponding to one, one time domain waveform output, or So if you have this kind of signal, then it will be represented as a discrete signal like this, and then each of those orange dot is representing the height of these blue points, basically the height. But we don't perform the regression in order to predict this height of each waveform value, but we actually discretize this value by using a certain number of bits. And so here, if we use 8 bits, and then it is represented as this discrete kind of a number that has these many different slots. Okay, and then typically how we obtain this is like so we set the minimum value over here, and then the maximum value over here, and then we uniformly discretize them. Okay, and then we can think of this regression problem as a classification problem that has 256 different bins or categories. Okay, so we perform the classification instead of the regression on this on predicting this value. And then from this, as I learned from the students, and this one, it's basically a kind of language model, right, along the time domain. So given the previous generated time domain signal, we want to predict the next value in this time domain signal. Okay, and then in its original form, it doesn't support any kind of TTS thing, right? Text to speech generation or synthesis, right? And then this tacotron is doing that kind of a text to speech synthesis. Okay, but according to what the student's explanation, this is basically taking the input as a character sequence or the sentence or basically the text, right? And then it tries to generate the audio signal, but so as it shows as this Griffin limb construction, just before that, I mean, this kind of thing, this thing is our spectrogram predicted or generated for each time slot. Okay, and then from here, it is just basically sequence to sequence model, and then we can also use the attention model as well. And then at each time step as an output, it would be like I think it's kind of just some signal just before the spectrogram, and then once we obtain that spectrogram, and then we can use this Griffin limb reconstruction module that is just a post-processing algorithm that has no trainable part. Okay, but we can also concatenate the WaveNet. I mean, I'm just reiterating what I just learned from the students, but instead of that Griffin reconstruction algorithm or post-processing module, we can concatenate that with the WaveNet thing. Okay, so in the case of WaveNet, the input will be this spectrogram that was generated by this tacotron, and then also in this case, we will also give the output that was actually generated from maybe this part, and then it will also be given as an input and then yeah, those input will be just concatenated. So the actual output, which represents the height in terms of this discrete value, and also this spectrogram generated by the tachotron. And then also, if we use the attention module, and then the student also mentioned that another additional vector, which is a weighted average based on our attention model, like coming from this part. So if we have this the sequence of 6 characters or maybe 6 words or whatever, and then we can think of this encoding vector over here, over there, and then we can think of their attention weighted average based on our attention vector, right? That will be also be given to this input as input of a wavenet model, and that will complete our kind of end-to-end speech, text-to-speech synthesis. Okay, yeah, it looks like quite an interesting model, and yeah. So this tachotron has been like it was released with the different versions, like from version 1, 2, and maybe I'm not sure if there was a version 3, but it's in the it's undergoing like active development for towards the practically useful and a really high quality synthesis example. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay, then. So this is an example of a spectrogram. Then so have you guys understand this CTC algorithm? Can anyone explain this part?
That the spectrogram, each time step of that spectrogram will generate a character based on log likelihood, and then they will be duplicated since many different times that will generate the same character if they belong to a character, and then reduplicate them to make it a word that makes sense.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So suppose we have 8 time steps that we generated in the decoding phase or by our decoder, and then suppose this one should be mapped with the cat, and then what will be our loss in this case? So which one is first? This one is first or this one is first? I mean, is this one first determined and then reduced to cat, or is this one like expanded to that one? So 이거 로스 펑션 어떻게 되죠? 혹시 아는 사람 있어요? So yeah, I was not clear by just only reading this slide. So I didn't understand, so I just briefly looked at the paper, and then it seems to work as follows. So this is a ground truth. So this one is, so this one is not first. This cat is our starting point. So cat is our ground truth. Yeah, ground truth character sequence from the speech signal. And that speech signal, because we are chopping them off with the equal length along the time axis. Suppose that time the length is 8. And then there are many different mappings from CAT with this guy, right? And then we basically consider all the possible expanded sequence, like this guy is also an expanded version of this CAT, right? And then also, there are many different variations within that 8, the decoded sequence of the length of an 8, right? And then we can consider all the possible expanded version of this cat with this length, right? And then suppose one of them was this guy, C, B, A, B, and T, and so on. And what does that mean? Here, what is the meaning of this B? It's just a break, right? It's a break. So it basically represents generating no sound, right? It generates no sound, right? And then, so this is the additional token that we add to our dictionary. In addition to just the original character ranging from A to Z. And and then we basically evaluate the loss function, or the negative log likelihood, when generating this sequence. Okay. And then we can also think of another sequence expansion of this guy. So by changing it with the break one, right? And in that case, the negative log likelihood, when fixing our model, when fixing our decoder, we can evaluate the negative log likelihood of the first sequence, and also we can evaluate the second sequence. But one thing to note is that the negative log likelihood, basically likelihood to generate these sequence are completely changing because we generated different characters in the previous time sequence, right? But anyways, we can basically evaluate the negative log likelihood of this another variation of this sequence, which is another variation of this original sequence of cat, right? And then we have quite a number of variations that fit into this sequence with the length of an 8, right? And then we evaluate all the negative log likelihood of each case, and then we just sum them up, and then we just minimize that total negative log likelihood. Okay. So initially, I was thinking about like generating maybe one, very optimal one, and then we focus on that. We just evaluate the log likelihood of that one, and then we minimize it. But it turns out not to be the case. Actually, we consider all the possible expansions starting from cat, and then compute the negative log likelihood of each case, and then sum them up, and then minimize them. Okay. And so this one, this one is so here we do not explicitly align this cat with the most probable expanded sequence, right? instead we consider all the possible sequence and then try to minimize minimize the negative log likelihood of all the possible cases. That can be an expansion of this cat. But here, in this case, because of this additional character that is corresponding to this break, okay, this break. So initially, in the traditional machine learning, like HMM or, I'm not sure exactly, but in this CTC kind of approach, rather than just rather than this kind of strategy, I mean the main point seems to be actually the introduction of this break token into our dictionary. So that allows to generate, I mean in this case, even though we have a cat, so in this case we don't, we can just make our model output as just nothing. I mean we don't need to map any of this generated output into one of our tokens given in our ground truth. Okay, so that actually allows our that makes our model much easier to handle, and thus it's a little ambiguous, but this kind of representation, in this representation, so this dashed part is actually the softmax probability value. Okay, softmax probability value corresponding to this break token. Okay, but what if we don't introduce this break token? Okay, what if we don't introduce this break token, and then along this, out of these total sequences that we generated from our decoder, or this given the speech signal, we would map cat as like C, 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 and A, and maybe TT, right? So in this case, for each of our generated tokens along our in our decoder output, and it should be mapped to any one of our characters in our ground truth. So so that relaxing kind of this kind of thing, so that some part may not need to be matched, may not need to match to a particular character. I mean that way our model will work more in a robust manner. Okay, so there is a tutorial paper or tutorial document about this CTC thing, and then compared to this figure, there is another figure that has no introduction of this break character, and then it is kind of giving a unreliable or worse kind of quality of an output. Okay, so did you guys understand this hierarchical thing? So given our audio signal, so these are each time time duration or each time unit that we set as a 20 millisecond and so on. So the main problem is that this sequence may become really long, right? And then if we compute the attention vectors on these really long sequence, and then the computation could be really much. So we actually do some hierarchical kind of aggregation. So it seems to be really simple, but we just concatenate those two hidden vectors. and then we form one single hidden vector, and then the third and fourth will become another hidden state vector, and so on. And then we perform the bidirectional LSTM or GRU, and then we also, after we obtain the encoding vector or encoding hidden state vector, and then we just aggregate them, I mean two of them into one, and that way we can reduce the signal length by half consecutively, right? And that way, if we set a certain level, and then this one will have much smaller signal length, and then we will just perform our attention on these much smaller lengths of the encoding vectors. Okay. So this author also proposed another speech recognition model based on the convolutional neural net. But these papers don't seem to have many citations, so it may not have a significant impact or much of a model novelty in their model. But so do you guys know what this conv LSTM? Conv LSTM. So oftentimes I see the papers like having the name of like CNN-RNN or maybe RNN-CNN and or LSTM-CNN or things like that. So they really like combines those different model architectures in their own manner. But in this conv LSTM, so I just briefly looked at the paper and then figured out what this conv LSTM is. And so see. So in the case of an LSTM based encoder of time domain signals, we will obtain the spectrogram that has maybe, suppose we have a 10-dimensional vector that represents the frequency component, okay, corresponding to a particular frequency, okay, and then, okay, so this is our input vector, and that can be viewed as kind of a word embedding vector. And then if we consider the LSTM that is done over here, okay, then we will have an hidden state vector here, and then this one is an input vector, and then we will perform the linear combination on these two vectors, right? Okay, and then suppose this one is maybe 20 dimensions, and this one is 10 dimension, and in the case of an LSTM, we have to generate FIOG, okay? So that is a kind of a linear combination of this HT-1 and XT, and then FIOG. What is the dimension of each vector? What is the dimension of IFOG? Yeah. So we have 10-dimensional input vector, and hidden state vector is 20. I mean, yeah, although we haven't specified the dimension of the cell, but we usually use the same dimensional cell vector with the hidden state vector. So yeah, it can be viewed as 20-dimensional vector, right? And then what is the linear transformation, the size of the linear transformation matrix? So if we just concatenate these two, and then yeah, it is just 20 by 30, because the first 20 is corresponding to ht minus 1, and then this 10-dimensional matrix is corresponding to xt, right? And so we have this many number of parameters, right? Okay, so in this case, so we want to make this part more efficient, okay, of a fully connected layer by using convolution. So how we perform this convolution on this input vector is as follows. So we have 10-dimensional input vector, and then suppose, so this 10-dimensional input vector is actually mapped into 20-dimensional hidden state vector, right? And then they will be added with the output. Yeah, so I'm just talking about this ht is maybe ht minus 1 whh plus wxh and maybe xt, right? And then I'm talking about this part, x wxh, and that is 10 by 20, right? Okay, and then in this case, so we are gonna use the convolution on that part instead of just a fully connected part. So how we compute the fully connected part is as follows. So suppose our length suppose our convolution filter, so I think, so it should, it makes sense in case this dimension should be the same. Okay, let's just simplify. I think this makes sense in the case of conv LSTM. So we have a 20 dimensions for both input and a hidden state vector, and then we just apply one single convolution filter all over this one-dimensional signal, and then that convolution filter has the length of maybe 4, and then maybe 5. Yeah, and then let's use zero padding so that we can generate the same length of the signal, and then and in this case, what is the number of parameters we need? It will be, in order to generate the 20-dimensional vector, that will be added to this hidden state vector ht, although we have to do the nonlinear transformation. But in order to generate the 20-dimensional vector, we only need a 5-dimensional convolution filter, right? So that way, we can just use a much smaller number of parameters. Okay? But one thing that I'm not sure is, so in this case, let's see. So I may be a little bit wrong in fine details of this conv LSTM, but this is how we kind of reduce the number of parameters from the fully connected network into, I mean, by using the convolution filter. And then in this case, so what makes it possible to apply or replace the convolution? I mean, what makes it possible to replace the fully connected layer with the convolution? I mean, so I wanted to ask the characteristic of our input signal. So this input signal, if we have a 20-dimensional input signal, we apply the convolution instead of a fully connected layer in order to generate the hidden state vector. But why do we not do that? Usually in the case of a word embedding vector, in the case of a language model or any other NLP tasks. So why is it possible to apply the convolution on this input vector? So the reason is because this input signal, I mean the adjacent dimensions are have really some meanings, right? So they are kind of continuous, or the frequency in order, right? So they are kind of ordered variable, right? So it kind of makes sense that, okay, so this is a frequency component of 10 hertz and 20 hertz and 30 hertz and 40 hertz and so on. And then it will kind of make sense to apply the convolution on, yeah, it's like a trigram or 5-gram pattern extractor, right? So that trigram or 5-gram should be found in the adjacent frequency band, ranging from 10 to 50 or 20 to 60 and so on, right? So that way, extracting out the local patterns, yeah, will make sense. But in the case of word embedding, each dimension, yeah, has an independent kind of meaning of the other dimensions. So even if, I mean, so the first dimension and the second dimension has nothing to do with each other in the case of word embedding, right? So in that case, we cannot arrange them in a kind of meaningful order, and thus we cannot apply kind of a local kind of pattern extractor by using the COM filter. But in the case of this frequency bands, so yeah, because they are kind of aligned or arranged in an increasing order of a frequency, so it makes sense to apply the COM filters. Okay, so that way, in order to generate a single node in our hidden state vector, we would use the entire 20-dimensional input vector. But in the case of COM operation, we will only use the subset or the small number of consecutive input sequence in order to generate one particular dimension value. Okay, so that is called a conval STM, shown in this paper.
그러면 저기서는 필터 개수가 그냥 한 개인 건가요?
그러니까 좋은 질문인데, 네. 그렇게 봤거든요, 그 논문에서. 네. 근데 이거를 여러 개를 쓰려면 이거 어떻게 될까요? 이걸 쭉 한 다음에 맥스 플링 해갖고 하나 만들고, 네. 그렇게 되는데, 그럼 파라미터 개수가 어떻게 되죠? 이게 5가 아니라 3 정도라고 하면 3에다가 20개? 가 필요한 거죠. 근데 우리는 여기 20개 곱하기 20개? 그래도 이거보단 적네요. 그러니까 내가 아까 그 파인 디테일을 잘 모르겠다고 한 게 이 두 개 중에 뭔지 헷갈리더라. 근데 아마 이렇게 필터 여러 개 써도 파라미터가 크게 fully connected 레이어보다는 적으니까 아마 이 방법이 맞는 게 아닐까 싶은데요. 네. 그러면 요거는 요거 따로 어떤 필터 적용해서 맥스 플링에서 뽑은 요건 요거대로의 필터가 있겠고, 요게 좀 더 말이 되지 않을까 싶네요. 네. Okay, yeah. So yeah, we may think of having a multiple filter and then applying the max pooling to generate the one single scalar value in each dimension of our 20-dimensional hidden state vector. So that is a conval STM. Okay, and then also I already passed in the previous slide, but in the case of speech recognition, where we give a time domain waveform signal, speech or audio signal, and then we transcribe them or convert them into a character sequence or maybe basically text, right? So in that case, so let's think about the bidirectional LSTM. So for example, so in this case, it's representing the bidirectional LSTM, right? So in the case of a bidirectional LSTM, it assumes that the entire input sequence is already given, right? Yeah, it's already given, right? But I was not sure if that is really true at first, because so if you're I'm not sure if anyone uses a dictation kind of functionality available in an iPhone or any other kind of smartphone. But maybe if I say 안녕하세요 and then it is kind of converting this speech signals in real time to text, into text, even before I didn't end my kind of speech signal, right? So 나는 학교에 갔습니다. So if I say so, and then it will just produce the output, I mean text or character sequence in the middle of this speech generation that I'm doing, right? So yeah, in that case, this bi-LSTM doesn't seem to make sense in that case, because we have to generate the text output given the partial audio sequence, right? But I figured that so I don't need to use Korean, but maybe suppose we're gonna use we're gonna generate this input audio signal, but in that case, at this point, and then using these partial sequence, and then we are given this partial sequence, but still at this moment we can perform the bidirectional LSTM and then generate the output text, right? Yeah, but have you had some experiences like I actually tried to regenerate such an example by just actually trying to generate really the example, but in this case 나는 and 학교에, and in that case up to maybe this point 나는 in that case it may generate suppose this one is an audio signal and then this one is like a dictated or text output, and then it is like 나는 instead of 학 it may generate maybe 팍, because it's really sounding similar to 학, right? But but in that case it is generating the signal only from this this signal segment, right? But if I give more signals, I mean continuously over time and up to this 나는 학교에, and then it will actually it would learn its own language model in this character level or maybe word level, and then it will just correct in real time and then change the entire dictation or the text output in this form. Okay, so I had this I sometimes have this kind of experiences, and I was kind of impressed that okay, so my iPhone or Apple's technology is really amazing. But in that case, in terms of the algorithm or the internal details, I mean I don't think I don't think anything is special. So given this input, so we will generate this, right? And then given this input, we will just generate the output from scratch, right? From the beginning, right? Instead of generating the next token, we are performing the decoding task, or this kind of generation of these text, I mean character sequences from scratch, given this entire sequence. We will do the bidirectional RNN, and thus even though this part was sounding like 팍, but if we are given this signal, and then due to the bidirectional RNN thing. And then the next, I mean, the the signal on the right will influence in a way that this one will be generated as HAK. Okay, and then in this case, another interesting thing that we can think about is as follows. So given these continuous time domain audio or speech signal, when should we generate the partial sequence of text? Okay, should it be here, or here, or here, and so on, right? So determining when to generate these partial sequence. I mean, before finishing our, or before actually pressing the button of ending the dictation functionality, the algorithm doesn't know when the entire signal will end, right? So in that case, at what point over time should we generate this partial sequence given our input that we got so far? I mean, I think that is an interesting kind of machine learning problem, because predicting the optimal point to actually perform the decoding, right? So I'm not sure if there is a paper like that, but I think that is a small kind of cute and interesting kind of research topic. And also I think I saw one similar paper in the machine translation applications. So suppose we are writing in the Google Translate page, and then we just write our our input or source sentence, and then it can be generated in real time as well. Okay, and also it involves this exact same problem about when to perform our decoding, right? Given the partial sequence, right? And then okay. Okay, in the case of machine translation, no. So you guys have seen this kind of figure, right? So this is actually reversing the direction in the middle part, right? I mean, direction of like translation, right? So that is where this, the order of words is actually reversed between the two different languages, or when performing the translation. So in that case, can we actually perform like the classification around here at this point? Right. So if our input sentence, I'm always confused which one is actually input and output. But suppose this one is input. But if our input was up to this point, then clearly we shouldn't generate our we shouldn't perform the decoding, because we are expecting another word that should appear before these two other words, right? So I think like real-time machine translation kind of stuff. I saw one kind of paper published a few years ago. Also written by Kyunghyun Cho, and I haven't looked at that paper in detail, but I think personally that is quite an interesting problem that involves that actually considers how this deep learning technique is actually used from the human perspective, involving these UI thing and Any other questions? Okay, I almost forgot the details of, or yeah, I didn't fully understand the latter parts. Okay, then okay, probably that's it for this chapter. Okay, let's think about the let's think about the convolution thing in the text case. So, any questions in this chapter? Do you guys know what this is? A multi-channel idea thing. So it is something like this. So in the CNN, whether you say RNN or CNN, it doesn't really matter. It's really about the whether to fine-tune our word embedding layer or not, or how to fine-tune our word embedding layer. So suppose our pre-trained word embedding had maybe 10 dimensions. Okay, so in this case of this multi-channel stuff, is that we actually represent the word embedding as like 20 dimensions, and then we basically use the word embedding vector as this concatenated version of initially identical part. Okay, initially identical vectors, but doing any kind of a text classification or any of our main machine learning or deep learning training our models, we will only train or fine tune this part, right? So that's how this multi-channel idea works. Okay, so that way, if our task is really like prone to overfitting, and then if we allow our model to choose to fine-tune these word embedding part, and then it will be prone to overfitting, right? And so if we have an original copy, and then it may be less prone or less easily overfit to our data. So I believe everyone is familiar with the text classification, and so this was one of the quiz problem, right? So the answer was a highway. Okay, so here, so we have the original vector here, and then maybe some linear transformation or whatever, CNN or RNN transformation, and then we have a output vector, and then the output vector is actually linearly combined, I mean between these two, right, by having some weights, maybe 0.7 and 0.3 and so on, and then these two numbers, basically this one is represented as t, and then this one is represented as 1 minus t. And then suppose we have a three-dimensional vector, and then is it a dimensionalized vector, or the three-dimensional vector, or a single value? Is t single scalar, or is it three-dimensional vector? 네, 뭐죠? 3-dimensional vector, right? So it's like a forget gate and things like that, right? So it's applied dimension-wise. And then how do we determine this? So the way of determining this is based on also the same input. So input vector will also determine this value, right? So input vector, so this one, input vector y, is going through its own linear transformation and also going through the sigmoid and then generate this three-dimensional kind of sigmoid output, right? So in this case, so there is a one constraint in a way, yes, that this input and output vector should be added together with a certain weight, right? And thus these two vectors should have the same dimensions, right? The same dimensions. And also, yeah, compared to this highway network, if we think of the residual network, so this part is completely gone, and then this part is just one, and this part is just one, right? This is the, yeah, it can be viewed as a residual network, which is much simpler version of a highway network. But in practice, I think, yeah, sometimes some paper is using highway network rather than the residual network. But some, yeah, most of the time we use a resnet or this kind of skip connection with that adds the original vector with the weight of 1, right? So in that case, the residual network is a simpler version of this highway network, and thus it may seem a little bit inferior to residual network, but it actually, it turns out not to be the case because I mean, yeah, this part of additional kind of training or that additional module can maybe play a role of kind of overfitting kind of thing, right? So yeah, in practice, I think in practice people find that just a residual network architecture is just enough for many of the applications. But at least, yeah, this one, yeah, is called the highway network. And then so in the case of dense net, yeah, in the context of a convolutional neural net, so we can have, yeah, we can add this original signal to the output, but also another way would be to just concatenate this vector with this vector, right? That kind of concatenation is also possible, right? So in that case, we don't need this additional module, right? And thus concatenation is still a simple model, but it will increase the dimensions of the output vector, right? Because the output vector dimension is basically the sum of input and output vectors. Okay, and then okay, so this one is called a dense net. I mean, in the context of convolutional neural net, and then in this case, as I mentioned, in the case of a highway network and the residual network, the input and output dimension should be the same. But in the case of this concatenation, their dimension may not need to be the same, right? So yeah, in also the dense net case, yeah, the activation map and their depths can be different between the input and output after doing the convolution. Okay, but still, this increased depth or increased dimension may give a problem because, yeah, in the next layer that takes this concatenated vector as an input, we'll have to take care of a large dimensional vector, right? So yeah, in the case of convolution, convolution one, convolution neural net, what kind of architecture do we use in order to kind of, overcome or kind of avoid that kind of computational, intensive computations? In the case of DenseNet or maybe GoogleNet, and what is the structure that we use in order to avoid this kind of problem? 네, one by one compo를 쓰죠. So one by one comp. So what is the structure called? What is that structure? 네, bottleneck structure라고 하죠. bottleneck structure. Yeah. So yeah, I'm gonna skip that part because we are not. This is not about the vision class. But if you're interested, and then you can search for like, yeah, bottleneck or structure. Yeah. So you guys know the dropout, right? There's a dropout. So this was one of the questions in our quiz, right? So in this case, is there any better way in terms of a computation efficiency? I mean, so that additional multiplication of p can introduce, although it's a small bit, but it can introduce additional computational overhead, right? In the testing time, let's imagine it is really like a real-time face detection thing, and then we have to multiply p over and over at each layer's output, or each, yeah, and then it will introduce some amount of a computational overhead, right? So how do we avoid that? Avoid that kind of thing. Does anyone know? A little additional trick. So I may be wrong, but I thought of, so this one is a kind of code level, kind of implementation of dropout, where we have an output, which is a linear transformation, and then adding bias, and then go through the ReLU nonlinear transformation by doing this max operation, and then we apply, we multiply P at the output for this activation, whether it's an internal node or internal representation, or it's it's just maybe last layer. It doesn't matter, but we always apply like by the multiplication of the dropout probability, right? But I thought of like multiplying P in the training time as well, instead of just multiplying P in the testing time. Does it make sense? Or I may be confused, but I thought of like putting those additional multiplication of P in the testing time into the training phase by just multiplying over here, like so this is dropout mask, and then this H1 and times 1 over P. Okay, that is actually boosting up. So the each node is dropped out with the probability of 70%, and then all the output will have a smaller kind of a norm, right, or smaller magnitude, and thus in order to incorporate that, we need to multiply 0.7 when using all the nodes in the testing phase. So that's why we have to multiply P over here. But I thought of like multiplying over here 1 over P, and that way we can just reconstruct the original magnitude, just like the situation where we use all the activations without dropout. is it actually used or not? 이거 쓰죠? 이거죠?
트레이닝 때는 저렇게 하는 테스트 때는 안
그러니까.
받아도 되고.
그죠? 저거 실제로 쓰죠? 그죠? 그리고 실제로 드랍아웃이 다 저렇게 돼 있지 않아요? 실제 코드가. 네, 내가 꿈꾼 건 아니죠. 하여튼 이렇게 하면, so yeah, by doing this, yeah, we don't actually need to change anything on the testing code. Okay. Okay, then yeah, I don't have much to explain in this case, in this lecture. So yeah, I have just a little more. So yeah, in this case, so what is the narrow and the wide convolution? And also, what is the K-max pooling? K-max pooling. So yeah, there is no way to understand them by looking at this slide. But yeah, so I need to teach this class, so I had to look at the paper in the last minute just before our class, and then I figured out what these mean. And so in the case of a narrow convolution, it is basically the convolution of doing convolution with the no zero padding at all. Okay, no zero padding at all. Okay, so that is the smallest possible output vector dimension that we can generate, right? But what about the wide one? So when it comes to the padding, in the case of convolutional neural net, we use either no padding at all or something called the same padding, so that we can generate the same image size as the input image size, right? So that's why we call it as a same padding, right? So in the case of 5x5 filter, and then what will be the padding size for the same padding? 뭐죠? So 5x5 convolution filter. So we want the output image width and height to be the same as those of input image. So we always think of this center pixel, right? So suppose our image is like that, and then we always align the center pixel at the very top left, and then we need 2 more pixels on the left and top, and that's the number of zero padding, right? Okay, and then in this case, can we do the padding a little bit more? Okay, so that is corresponding to this wide convolution thing, and so not just we don't just align the center pixel. Okay, we can actually increase the activation map size or activation image size in a way that we align this pixel on the right of our convolution net into this pixel. So that way, so our convolution will be something like this thing. Okay, so that is a maximum possible kind of ending point, right? So that is called this wide convolution. Okay, so that will correspond to considering only one word. Okay, in the case of text classification or text CNN. Okay, and then let's also describe the notion of this K-max pooling. So K-max pooling. So in typical text classification, suppose we apply one particular filter, and then suppose our signal is, input sequence is I go to school, and then we will have this activation. Suppose we apply the same padding, and then the convolution activation map will be what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, so the activation map will have the length of 5, right? So in this case, we usually do the max pooling, which means we pick up the one largest component, right? And then here k max pooling is basically selecting or picking up the k largest numbers and the form a vector instead of just a single scalar value of a maximum value. So if it was 2, 8, 10, minus -1, and -3, and then the max pooling output will be 10, but maybe k max pooling where k is 3, and then we generate the three-dimensional vector, and then we pick up the three largest value, 10, 8, and 2, but we kind of obey their order in terms of their appearance. Okay, so how we obtain these one is as follows. So we mark, though it's not very intuitive, not very interesting example. So the output will be 2, 8, 10. But if it was maybe, we had a 3 here, and then it will be 8, 10, 3. So that way we can kind of obey the order of these k largest numbers in terms of their appearance in the sequence, right? So that's what this k max pooling is called, is doing. Okay, so the time's up. So so that's it for today, and thank you very much, and see you next time. 네, 수고했어요.
다음 주에 저희 예비군 가가지고 아마 퀴즈랑 볼 수도 있을 것 같은데.
나는 느낌이 나도 왔어.
각각의 토픽에 전체 12토픽에 가장 가까운 시뮬레이터를 그렇게 하위 유저들도 시뮬레이터 집어넣으니까 얘처럼 거의 비슷하게 0.9 이렇게 나오는데 몇 개는 상위 유저가 훨씬 더 하위 유저. 그리고 그 가격이랑 코릴레이션을 했는데
이게 토픽 하나랑 하나의 시뮬러를 한 거야. 탑 유저의 시뮬러티?
네, 그 상위 유저 20%들이 쓴 글 가지고 토픽 모델링하고 전체 유저들이 쓴 글이랑 상위 유저를 제외한 나머지 전체에 대해서 이렇게 했었어요. 그리고 토픽 코릴레이션도 구했는데 재밌는 게 하위 유저들이 더 가볍게 코릴레이션이 높더라고요. 보니까 그냥 상위 유저들은 좀 더 기술적인 거에도 관심 많고 여러 개 관심이 많은데 하위 유저들은 좀 더 가격에만 관심이 많다는 거.
콜레이션이 뭐라고요?
턴 바이 데이 매트릭스로 토픽 모델링해서 각각 날짜별로 이렇게
네.
토픽 웨이트를 구할 수 있잖아요. 그래서 그거를 가격
네.
그래프랑 이렇게 콜레이션 했더니 하위 유저가 훨씬 높게 나왔어요. 근데 전체 토픽이랑 상위 유저들이 쓴 토픽들은 그렇게 막
그 토픽과 가격의 코릴레이션 어떻게 보여요? 토픽 하나하나마다 코릴레이션을 보면 에버리지 된다 이거야. 토픽이 여러 개잖아요.
그래서 일단 그 코릴레이션 가장 높은 토픽 몇 개를 뽑았더니 이렇게 나왔어요.
그 다음에 얘네들의 코릴레이션 평균은요?
평균은 내지 않고 그냥 코릴레이션 높은 상위 5개 토픽을 봤더니 한 전체 유저나 상위 유저는 2개 정도가 이상적으로 꽤 높은 스코어인데 나머지는 다 약간 음수 스코어거나 이렇게 붙었거든요.
네.
근데 하위 유저는 전체가 다 엄청 높은 코릴레이션이 있어요.
이게 양의 코릴레이션으로 큰 것과 이제 음의 코릴레이션으로 큰 것도 사실 똑같은 거일 것 같은데. 그러니까 절대값으로 좀 봐야 될 것 같지 않아요?
네, 절대값으로 했는데도
그래요?
절대값으로 했는데도 하위 유저가 훨씬 그렇게
신기하네요.
영민 선배한테 생각하니까 뭔가 좋아 보인다고
이거 어디 쓰죠?
그 사이언티픽 레포트라는데
내자고요?
내자고
그래요?
원래는 IEEE 억세스
네.
내자고 있었는데 뭔가 한 단계 더 위에 전용될 때 내자고
좋죠.
또 이제 피겨 실험들 다 돌려가지고
네.
글만 쓰면 돼.
좋네요.
딱 뭔가 그 아까 그 그래프도 로그 그래프
네.
그걸로 해서 봤더니 딱 그 뭐더라 지프스의 뭐 그거
네.
엄청 잘 따라서는
네네네.
그것도 신기해.
좋네요. 여러분